The Galactic Academy of Interstellar Sciences was the most famous school in the known universe. It floated in the empty space between three star systems, far away from any planet. The Academy was a massive station made of silver metal and glowing blue lights. It was home to thousands of students from over 40 different alien species. They came here to learn, to grow, and to understand the universe better. For 300 years, the Academy had welcomed students from across the galaxy. But this year was different. This year, they had their first human student. His name was Jake Mitchell. He was 22 years old, with messy brown hair and green eyes that always seemed to be smiling. He came from a place called Texas on the planet Earth. He was tall by human standards, with broad shoulders and hands that were rough from years of working on his family's farm. He had come to the Academy to study engineering because he loved building things and figuring out how machines worked. When Jake first arrived at the Academy, he noticed that the other students looked at him strangely. Some of them whispered when he walked past. Others moved out of his way quickly, as if they were afraid of him. Jake did not understand why. He was just a regular guy from Earth. He liked pizza, country music, and fixing old trucks. He was not scary at all, but to the aliens, he was terrifying. You see, humans were very new to the galactic community. It had only been about 100 years since Earth made first contact with alien life. In that time, the other species had learned about Earth and its inhabitants. What they learned made them nervous. They called Earth a death world. It was a planet where everything seemed designed to kill its own creatures. The weather was violent and unpredictable. Huge storms called hurricanes could destroy entire cities. The ground itself would shake and split open in earthquakes. Mountains would explode and cover the land in fire and ash. The oceans were filled with creatures that had rows of sharp teeth. Even the tiny insects could inject poison that would stop a heart. And somehow, humans had not only survived on this nightmare planet, but had thrived there. They had become the dominant species. They had built cities and machines and eventually spaceships that carried them to the stars. To the gentle, fragile species of the galaxy, humans were like monsters from a horror story. They were creatures that had been forged in the fires of a world that wanted them dead. Jake knew none of this. He just thought the aliens were shy. His lab partner was a being named Valera. She belonged to a species called the Luminari. They came from a world with very low gravity and gentle sunlight. Because of this, their bodies were delicate and beautiful, but also very fragile. Valera had smooth blue skin that was almost see-through. When she stood in bright light, you could see the faint glow of her internal organs. She had 4 thin arms that moved with the grace of a dancer. Her eyes were large and purple, like 2 shining gems. Her voice sounded like wind chimes in a soft breeze. When the Academy told Valera that she would be working with the human, she had been scared. She had asked to be assigned a different partner. She had begged, but the Academy had refused. They said it was important for species to learn to work together. So Valera had no choice. On the first day of their partnership, Valera watched Jake walk into the engineering lab. He moved with a confidence that made her nervous. His footsteps were heavy on the metal floor. His hands looked strong enough to crush metal. When he smiled at her, she could see his teeth, and she had to remind herself that humans were not predators who ate other intelligent beings. "Hey there," Jake said in a friendly voice. "You must be Valera." "I'm Jake. Looks like we're going to be partners this semester." Valera's 4 hands trembled slightly as she returned his greeting. "Yes, hello, I am Valera. It is nice to meet you." Jake did not seem to notice her fear. He looked around the lab with excitement in his eyes. The room was filled with advanced technology that humans on Earth could only dream about. There were machines that could shape metal with beams of light. There were computers that could calculate problems that would take a human brain 1,000 years to solve. There were tools that seemed like magic to someone from Earth. "This is amazing," Jake said. "Back home, I had to fix tractors with rusty wrenches and duct tape. This stuff is incredible. Valera did not know what a tractor was, but she nodded politely. She showed Jake how to use the equipment in the lab. She explained the safety rules and the proper procedures. When she picked up the plasma cutter, she handled it like it was a live bomb. "You must be very careful with this tool," Valera said. "The plasma blade is extremely hot. It can cut through almost any material. Even a small touch could cause a terrible burn. If you are injured by this tool, you could need weeks of regeneration therapy to heal." Jake took the plasma cutter from her and examined it with interest. "Cool. It's like a welding torch, but way more advanced." He turned it on and off a few times, testing its weight in his hand. Valera made a small sound of worry. "Please be careful." "Relax," Jake said with a grin. "I've been using power tools since I was 10. I know how to be careful." But Valera could not relax. Every time Jake picked up a tool, she expected something terrible to happen. Every time he moved quickly, she flinched. She had read the reports about humans. She knew that they came from a world of constant danger. But knowing something and seeing it with your own eyes were two very different things. Their instructor was a being named Professor Tharn. He belonged to a species that looked like a mix between a rhinoceros and a person. He was huge, nearly 8 feet tall, with gray skin as thick as armor. 2 small horns grew from his forehead. His eyes were yellow and sharp. Despite his scary appearance, Professor Tharn was known as one of the kindest teachers at the academy. Tharn had also read the files on humans. Unlike the students, he had access to classified information. He knew things about humans that would give most aliens nightmares. He knew about their wars and their weapons. He knew about their ability to survive injuries that would kill most other species. He knew that humans had a word for this ability, resilience. As Tharn watched Jake work in the lab, laughing and joking with his nervous partner, he could not help but wonder what would happen when the other students finally saw what humans were truly capable of. He hoped for everyone's sake that they would never have to find out, but the universe rarely gives us what we hope for. 3 weeks passed at the Galactic Academy. Jake Mitchell had started to feel like he belonged there. He had learned the names of his classmates. He had figured out which food in the cafeteria was safe for humans to eat and which food would make him sick. He had even started to pick up a few words in other alien languages. Valera was still nervous around him, but she was getting better. She no longer jumped when he moved too quickly. She had stopped backing away when he stood too close. Sometimes she even laughed at his jokes. Jake considered this progress. The engineering lab had become Jake's favorite place in the whole academy. He loved working with the advanced technology. Back on Earth, he had spent hours in his father's garage, taking apart old engines and putting them back together. Here, he could build things that were beyond anything he had ever imagined. On this particular day, the lab was busier than usual. Students from several different classes were working on their projects at the same time. The room was filled with the sounds of machines humming and tools buzzing. The air smelled like hot metal and electricity. Jake and Valera were working on a power coupling that had stopped working properly. The small device was supposed to transfer energy from one system to another, but something inside it was broken. They had been trying to fix it for 2 days. "I think the problem is in the connector," Jake said, pointing at a tiny piece of metal inside the device. "It looks like it's bent. If I can straighten it out, the whole thing should work again." Valera leaned closer to look. Her large purple eyes studied the connector carefully. "You may be right, but we need to be very careful. If we damage the connector more, we will have to start over completely." "Don't worry," Jake said. "I've got steady hands." He reached for the plasma cutter to help him work on the delicate piece. The tool hummed softly as he turned it on. Valera watched him with her usual worried expression. At the workstation next to them, a student named Grix was working on his own project. Grix was a corvan, a species that had evolved on a world with dense forests. Corvans had 6 long limbs that helped them climb trees and swing through branches. They were wonderful climbers, but not very good at moving around in crowded spaces. Grix was always bumping into things and knocking stuff over. Jake did not see Grix coming. He was focused on the power coupling, carefully bringing the plasma cutter closer to the bent connector. His concentration was complete. His hands were steady. Then Grix tripped over a cable on the floor. His 6 limbs flailed wildly as he tried to catch his balance. One of his arms swung out and crashed into Jake's workstation. The impact was hard and sudden. Jake's hand jerked. The plasma cutter, still active, sliced across his forearm. The superheated blade cut through his skin like it was made of paper. A gash nearly 6 inches long opened up on his arm. For one terrible moment, everything in the lab seemed to freeze. Then the screaming started. Blood began to flow from Jake's wound. It was bright red, the color of ripe tomatoes or fire trucks or the setting sun back home in Texas. It dripped down his arm and fell onto the workstation in thick drops. Valera screamed. Her voice rose to a frequency so high that 2 glass containers on a nearby shelf shattered into pieces. She stumbled backward, her forearms waving in panic. Her purple eyes were wide with horror. Other students turned to see what had happened. When they saw the blood, they reacted with pure terror. A luminary student near the door began crying. A corvan fainted and fell to the ground with a heavy thud. A small, furry being from a species Jake did not know started running around in circles, making sounds like an alarm siren. Someone began shouting into a communication device, calling for emergency medical help. There's been a terrible accident. The human is bleeding. He is dying. We need help immediately. Professor Thon pushed through the crowd of panicking students. His large body knocked several of them aside as he rushed toward Jake's workstation. His yellow eyes were fixed on the wound, on the red blood that was still flowing freely. In his 300 years of teaching, he had seen many injuries, but he had never seen anything like this. On a limonary, a wound like this would be fatal within minutes. On his own species, it would require immediate surgery to save the injured person's life. He prepared himself to watch the human collapse. He prepared himself to see Jake fall to the ground and stop breathing. But Jake did not collapse. Jake did not fall. Jake did not even sit down. Instead, the human looked at his bleeding arm with an expression that Tharn could not understand. It was not fear. It was not pain. It was something closer to mild annoyance, like someone who had spilled coffee on their favorite shirt. "Huh," Jake said, his voice calm and casual. "That's gonna need stitches." The entire lab fell silent. Even the students who had been screaming stopped making sounds. They all stared at Jake with expressions of complete disbelief. Jake looked up at the crowd of horrified aliens. He seemed confused by their reactions. He raised one eyebrow, a gesture he often made when something did not make sense to him. "What?" he asked. "It's just a cut. Does anyone have a bandage? Or some clean cloth? I need to stop the bleeding." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just stared at him like he had grown a second head. Valera's voice came out as a tiny whisper. "Just a cut?" "Yeah," Jake said. He grabbed a clean cloth from the workstation and pressed it firmly against his wound. He did not wince. He did not cry out in pain. He just applied pressure like he had done this 100 times before. "It looks worse than it is. Trust me, I've had worse injuries than this from my mom's cat." Professor Thon found his voice. "Human Mitchell, you do realize that you have suffered significant damage to your body." Jake looked at the professor with something like amusement in his green eyes. "Sure, I can see that. Look, can someone just point me to the first aid kit? Or tell me where the nurse's office is? I'll be fine once I get this cleaned up and wrapped." "The medical bay has already been contacted," Tharn said slowly. "They are preparing for emergency surgery. Jake blinked. Then he laughed. The sound was so unexpected that several students jumped in surprise. Surgery? For this? Jake pulled back the cloth slightly to look at his wound. Blood was still flowing, but it had started to slow down already. Nah, this just needs some cleaning. Maybe 8 or 10 stitches, and a good bandage. I'll be back in class tomorrow. No big deal. Behind him, Grix the Corvin made a strange sound, like air escaping from a balloon. Then his 6 limbs went limp, and he collapsed to the floor in a dead faint. He was the 3rd person to pass out since the accident began. Jake looked at the unconscious alien with concern. Is he okay? Should someone check on him? But nobody was paying attention to Grix. They were all still staring at Jake, at the human who was bleeding heavily from a terrible wound and acting like nothing important had happened. They were all trying to understand how any living creature could be so calm in the face of such obvious injury. What kind of beings were these humans? What kind of world had created them? And if this was how they reacted to serious wounds, what else were they capable of surviving? These questions hung in the air like smoke, unanswered and deeply troubling. The silence in the engineering lab was so deep that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. All around him, aliens of different shapes and sizes stood frozen like statues. Their eyes were fixed on his wounded arm. Their faces showed expressions of horror and disbelief that Jake simply could not understand. He had been hurt before. Many times, actually. Growing up on a farm in Texas meant dealing with injuries on a regular basis. He had cut his hands on barbed wire fences. He had burned his arms on hot engine parts. He had broken bones, gotten stitches, and collected scars like other people collected stamps. This cut on his arm was painful, sure, but it was nothing he could not handle. So why was everyone looking at him like he was dying? Jake pressed the cloth tighter against his wound and tried to smile in a friendly way. Seriously, guys, I'm fine. This looks a lot scarier than it actually is. Humans bleed a lot from cuts, but we don't die from them. Not from ones like this, anyway. Valera finally found her voice. It was shaky and thin, like she was having trouble breathing. Your internal fluids are escaping from your body. You are losing the liquid that keeps you alive. How can you say you are fine? Because I'm fine, Jake said patiently. Look, humans have about 5 liters of blood in our bodies. I've probably lost maybe a quarter of a liter tops. My body is already working to stop the bleeding. See? He lifted the cloth slightly to show her. It's slowing down already. That's called clotting. My blood cells are sticking together to seal the wound. Valera stared at the wound with her large purple eyes. She could see that Jake was telling the truth. The blood was not flowing as fast as it had been before. Something was happening at the edges of the cut. Something that looked almost like the wound was trying to close itself. Your body heals itself? She asked in wonder. Yeah, of course. Doesn't yours? Valera shook her head slowly. If a luminary suffers a wound like this, we must receive immediate medical treatment. We do not have the ability to repair ourselves without help. Without treatment, we would simply stop functioning. Jake frowned. That sounds really inconvenient. Before Valera could respond, Professor Thorne stepped forward. The huge alien moved carefully, as if he was afraid that sudden movements might make Jake's condition worse. His yellow eyes studied the human with new understanding. Human Mitchell, Thorne said, I have read the reports about your species. I know that humans are more durable than most beings in the galaxy. But I must admit, seeing it with my own eyes is remarkable. It's really not a big deal, Jake insisted. Back home, this would barely count as an emergency. I'd probably just put some bandages on it myself and go back to whatever I was doing. A small student with gray fur and big black eyes spoke up from the crowd. His name was Pip, and he came from a species that was known for being very curious about everything. You would continue working? With a wound like that? Would you not need to rest and recover? I mean, I'd probably take it easy for a few days, Jake admitted. But yeah, I'd keep working. Humans are pretty good at ignoring pain when we need to. Ignoring pain? Pip's eyes grew even wider. You can choose to not feel pain? Jake thought about how to explain it. It's not that we don't feel it. We definitely feel it. This hurts quite a bit, actually. But pain is just our body's way of telling us something is wrong. Once we know what's wrong, we can kind of push the pain to the side and focus on fixing the problem. The aliens exchanged looks of amazement. Pain was something they all feared deeply. For most species in the galaxy, pain was overwhelming and impossible to ignore. The idea that someone could simply choose to push past it was beyond their understanding. Professor Tharn cleared his throat. The medical team is waiting for you in the medical bay. Perhaps we should let them examine you, just to be safe. Jake shrugged with his uninjured arm. Sure, I guess. But honestly, all I really need is a bandage. He looked around at the frightened faces of his classmates and sighed. Look, I know this seems scary to you all, but humans deal with stuff like this all the time. We evolved on a planet where getting hurt was just part of daily life. If we couldn't recover from injuries, we would have gone extinct a long time ago. He started walking toward the door, still holding the cloth against his arm. The crowd of students parted before him like water flowing around a rock. Nobody wanted to get too close. They watched him with a mixture of fear and fascination. Valera hurried after him on her thin legs. I will come with you to the medical bay. Jake smiled at her. Thanks, but you don't have to. I'm sure you have better things to do than watch me get stitches. I want to come, Valera said firmly. It was perhaps the bravest thing she had ever done. I want to understand how you can be so calm about this. As they walked through the corridors of the academy, other students stopped and stared. Word had spread quickly through the station's communication network. Everyone had heard about the human who was bleeding badly but refused to panic. They whispered to each other as Jake passed by. Is that him? The human? Look at his arm. How is he still walking? I heard he laughed when it happened. What kind of creature laughs at its own injury? Jake pretended not to hear the whispers. He had dealt with worse things than curious aliens. He remembered his first day at high school back on Earth, when he had been the new kid that everyone stared at. This was not so different. The medical bay was located on the other side of the academy. It was a long walk, and by the time they arrived, Jake's arm had started to throb with a dull, constant pain. He did not show it on his face, though. He had learned long ago how to hide pain from others. Showing weakness was not something he did easily. The doors to the medical bay slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, a team of alien medical staff stood waiting. They were dressed in white uniforms and wore expressions of intense concern. At the front of the group was the chief medical officer, a tall being with silver skin and eyes like liquid metal. She looked at Jake with surprise. You are the emergency patient? But you are walking. You are conscious. You are... She paused, searching for the right word. You are alive. Yep, Jake said cheerfully. Still alive. Still walking. Still conscious. And still really hoping someone has a bandage. The chief medical officer stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked at his arm, at the blood-soaked cloth, at the wound that should have been life-threatening but clearly was not. She had been practicing medicine for over 50 years. She had treated patients from dozens of different species. But she had never seen anything like this. Please, she said finally, come with me. I think we have much to learn about human biology. Jake followed her deeper into the medical bay, leaving a trail of stunned alien faces behind him. Valera stayed close by his side, her purple eyes never leaving his injured arm. She was beginning to realize that everything she thought she knew about the universe might be wrong. If humans could survive wounds like this with nothing but a bandage and some stitches, what else could they survive? And more importantly, what did it mean for a species to be this hard to kill? The answers, she suspected, would be both terrifying and amazing. The medical bay of the Galactic Academy was the most advanced medical facility that Jake had ever seen. The room was large and bright, filled with machines that hummed and blinked with colorful lights. Everything was clean and white and smelled like something between a hospital and a science laboratory. Medical equipment lined the walls, some of which looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Dr. Solara, the chief medical officer, had been working at the academy for over 50 years. She was a Meridian, a species known throughout the galaxy for their intelligence and their skill in medicine. Her silver skin reflected the bright lights of the medical bay. Her eyes, which looked like pools of shining mercury, studied Jake with intense curiosity. Before Jake arrived, she had prepared for the worst. Her team had set up emergency blood replacement equipment. They had activated trauma stabilization fields that could keep a dying patient alive long enough for surgery. They had even prepared cryogenic suspension pods, which could freeze a patient in time while doctors figured out how to save them. Dr. Solara had expected to see a human on the edge of death. She had expected to fight hard to keep him alive. She had expected an emergency unlike any she had faced before. Instead, Jake Mitchell walked into her medical bay under his own power, smiled at her, and asked for a bandage. "This is the emergency?" Dr. Solara asked, her professional calm cracking slightly. "Apparently," Jake said with a shrug. Everyone in the lab freaked out. I tried to tell them it was just a cut, but nobody would listen. So here I am. Dr. Solara guided him to an examination table. Jake sat down and finally let go of the bloody cloth he had been holding against his arm. The wound was clearly visible now. It was a long, deep cut that ran across his forearm. The edges of the wound were red and angry-looking. Blood still seeped from it, though much more slowly than before. Dr. Solara picked up her medical scanner, a small device that could analyze a patient's body in seconds. She ran it over Jake's wound and watched as data appeared on a screen nearby. What she saw made her question whether her equipment was working correctly. "This is impossible," she said quietly. "What's wrong?" Jake asked. "Your body." Dr. Solara pointed at the data on the screen. "It is already responding to the injury. Your blood cells are gathering at the wound site. Your white blood cells are rushing to prevent infection. You have some kind of automatic healing system built into your biology?" Jake nodded like this was obvious. "Yeah, it's called clotting. Humans do that. Our blood forms a natural barrier to stop bleeding and keep germs out. And this healing response, it is automatic. You do not need to consciously control it. Nope, it just happens on its own. Has been happening since I was born." Dr. Solara stared at him with something close to wonder in her silver eyes. She had studied medicine for decades. She had learned about hundreds of different species and their various biologies. But she had never encountered anything like this before. "If I clean this wound and close it with stitches," she said slowly, "what happens next?" "My body handles the rest," Jake explained. "The skin grows back together. The tissue underneath repairs itself. Give it a week or two, and there will just be a scar. The scar might fade over time, or it might not. Depends on the person and the injury." "A scar," Dr. Solara repeated. "You will simply heal? Without regeneration therapy? Without cellular reconstruction technology? Without medical nanobots to repair the damage? I mean, I'll probably put some antibiotic ointment on it to prevent infection. Maybe take some pain medicine if it hurts too much. But yeah, basically, I'll just heal naturally." Dr. Solara set down her scanner and walked to a computer terminal. She pulled up the human medical database that the Academy kept on file. It was full of information that Earth's medical community had shared after first contact. She had looked at this database before, but she had never read it closely. Now, she began scrolling through the entries with growing amazement. The information was incredible, terrifying. unbelievable. Human bones could break and then grow back together on their own. If a bone was set properly, it would heal in just a few weeks. There were even cases of humans walking on broken legs before they realized anything was wrong. Human immune systems could learn to fight diseases. If a human survived an illness, their body would remember how to fight it. The next time they encountered the same disease, they would be protected. This was something most species in the galaxy could only dream of. Human organs could continue functioning even when they were damaged. A human could survive with only one kidney, only part of a liver, only part of their stomach. Their bodies would adapt to the loss and keep working, and human pain tolerance was beyond anything Dr. Solara had ever imagined. There are records of humans staying conscious and alert even during severe injuries. There were stories of humans continuing to fight, to work, to survive even when their bodies were badly damaged. They had something called adrenaline, a chemical their bodies produced during stress that could temporarily make them stronger and help them ignore pain. Dr. Solara turned to look at Jake, who was sitting patiently on the examination table and looking around the medical bay with curiosity. He did not look like a monster. He did not look like an unstoppable killing machine. He looked like a young person who was mildly inconvenienced by his injury. What kind of death world breeds creatures like you? She whispered. Jake grinned. Earth, you should visit sometime. Beautiful planet. Great food. Friendly people. Just maybe don't go during hurricane season, or earthquake season, or wildfire season. Or honestly, you know what? Any season can be dangerous. But it's still a nice place. Valera, who had been standing quietly near the door, stepped forward. Hurricane season? Earthquake season? Your planet has regular seasons of natural disasters? Well, yeah. Hurricanes are big storms that form over the ocean. They can knock down buildings and flood whole cities. Earthquakes are when the ground shakes because of movement under the surface. Sometimes they cause buildings to fall or create giant waves called tsunamis. Wildfires are when forests catch on fire and burn for days or weeks. They can cover areas bigger than some countries. The medical staff exchanged horrified looks. And humans live on this planet? One of the nurses asked. By choice? It's home, Jake said simply. We love it there. Besides, it's not all bad. Earth has amazing sunsets, and beaches, and mountains, and forests full of animals. Sure, some of those animals can kill you if you're not careful, but most of them are pretty harmless. Dr. Solara shook her head slowly. She was beginning to understand something important about humans. They were not strong because they had been born that way. They were strong because their world had forced them to be. Every generation, Earth had tested humanity with disasters and predators and diseases. The weak had died. The strong had survived. Over millions of years, this process had created beings who could withstand almost anything. Let me treat your wound, Dr. Solara said finally. I would like to observe the healing process. For scientific purposes. Sure, Jake agreed easily. Go ahead. Dr. Solara cleaned the wound with antibacterial solution. Jake winced slightly, but did not complain. She numbed the area with a gentle anesthetic and then carefully stitched the cut closed. Her movements were precise and professional. When she was finished, she wrapped the arm in a clean white bandage. There, she said. The stitches should dissolve on their own as your body heals. Please come back in a few days so I can check on your progress. Jake looked at his bandaged arm and smiled. Thanks, Doc. This feels much better already. You should rest, Dr. Solara advised. Give your body time to recover. Jake hopped off the examination table. I will, but I'll probably be back in class tomorrow. Can't let a little cut slow me down. Dr. Solara watched him walk out of the medical bay with Valera by his side. She thought about everything she had learned today. She thought about the human medical files and the incredible things they contained. She thought about the young man who had looked at a serious wound and asked for nothing more than a bandage. Remarkable, she said to herself. Absolutely remarkable. She made a note in her computer to begin a new research project. Subject: human resilience. She had a feeling it was going to be a very interesting study. News of the incident spread through the Galactic Academy faster than light travels through space. Within hours, every student and teacher on the station had heard the story. By the next day, it seemed like the only thing anyone wanted to talk about. The story grew bigger with each telling. Some versions said that Jake had cut off his entire hand and then calmly asked for tape to stick it back on. Other versions claimed that he had continued working on his project while bleeding, refusing to stop until it was finished. The wildest version said that he had laughed at the sight of his own blood and made jokes about painting the walls red. None of these stories were true, of course, but they showed how deeply the incident had affected everyone at the academy. For beings who had never seen such casual acceptance of injury, Jake's calm reaction was almost impossible to understand. Jake himself was confused by all the attention. He returned to class the next day, just as he had promised, with a clean bandage wrapped around his arm. He expected everything to go back to normal. Instead, he found himself at the center of a storm of curiosity and wonder. Students, who had avoided him before, now wanted to sit near him in class. They asked him questions about Earth, about human biology, about how it felt to be injured. They looked at him like he was some kind of superhero from a children's story. Does it still hurt? A small green student asked him during lunch. A little, Jake admitted. It's more of a dull ache now. Nothing too bad. And you can just ignore it? You can pretend the pain is not there? I don't pretend it's not there. I just don't let it stop me from doing things. Pain is useful because it tells you something is wrong. But once you know what's wrong, you don't need to keep focusing on the pain. You focus on fixing the problem instead. The green student thought about this for a long moment. That is a very strange way to think about pain. Maybe, Jake said, but it works for us. Valera had changed the most since the incident. The fear that had filled her eyes when she first met Jake was gone now. In its place was something new: respect, curiosity, and maybe even friendship. She spent more time with him than ever before, asking questions and listening to his answers with intense attention. One afternoon, she found him in the cafeteria eating something called spicy curry. The dish was bright red and gave off a smell that made her eyes water from across the room. She sat down across from him and watched him shovel the food into his mouth. That substance, she said carefully, contains capsaicin. My species uses that chemical as an industrial cleaner. It is considered too dangerous to touch with bare skin. Jake nodded, his mouth full of curry. Yeah, capsaicin is spicy. That's what gives this stuff its kick. It's my favorite. Spicy, Valera repeated. You mean it causes pain? Kind of. It triggers pain receptors in the mouth and throat. But it's a good kind of pain. Hard to explain. Humans actually seek it out. We think it makes food taste better. Valera shook her head in disbelief. You actively choose to experience pain because you enjoy it? Well, when you put it that way, it sounds weird. But yeah, basically, does nothing harm you? Valera asked. Is there anything in the universe that humans cannot survive? Jake considered the question seriously. Plenty of things harm us. We're not invincible. We get sick, we get hurt, we die just like everyone else. We just deal with it differently, I guess. He set down his spoon and looked at her. Humans evolved on a planet that was constantly trying to kill us. Every day was a fight for survival. The weather wanted to kill us. The animals wanted to kill us. Sometimes even the plants wanted to kill us. We had to adapt. Adapt, Valera said softly. You make it sound so simple. It wasn't simple. It took millions of years and countless generations. A lot of humans died along the way, but the ones who survived passed down their strength to their children. Over time, we became what we are now, a species that refuses to give up. Valera thought about her own world, her own people. The Luminari had evolved on a gentle planet with soft light and mild weather. They had never faced the challenges that humans had faced. They had never needed to develop the same kind of toughness. "I think I am beginning to understand," she said. "Humans are not naturally stronger than other species. You are stronger because you had to be, because your world gave you no other choice." "Exactly," Jake said with a smile. "We're not special. We're just stubborn." Professor Tharn had started including lessons about human biology in his engineering classes. He used Jake as a willing example, explaining to the students how human bodies worked. He talked about adrenaline and its effects. He talked about the human ability to push through pain. He talked about the way humans refused to stay down when the universe knocked them over. "The human species," Tharn told his class one day, "represents something we rarely see in the galaxy. They are not the strongest beings physically. They are not the smartest. They are not the fastest or the most powerful. But they possess something that may be even more valuable." "What is that, Professor?" a student asked. Tharn looked at Jake, who was sitting in the back of the room with his arms still bandaged. "Persistence. The absolute refusal to accept defeat. When a human is knocked down, they get back up. When they are hurt, they heal and keep going. When they face impossible odds, they find a way to win anyway." Jake felt his face get warm with embarrassment. "You're making us sound way cooler than we actually are. Am I?" Tharn asked. "Tell me, Human Mitchell, what would a human do if they were lost in space with limited oxygen and no way to call for help?" Jake shrugged. "Figure out how to stretch the oxygen as long as possible. Try to repair the communication system. Look for any way to signal for help. Keep trying until either rescue came or the oxygen ran out. And if rescue never came, then we die knowing we did everything we could. But humans don't give up while there's still a chance. That's just not who we are." The students in the class exchanged glances. They were beginning to see humans in a new light. These beings from the death world called Earth were not monsters to be feared. They were survivors to be respected. At the end of the semester, Jake's wound had healed completely. Just as he had predicted, it left behind a thin white scar on his forearm. Dr. Solara had documented the entire healing process. Amazed by how efficiently the human body repaired itself, on the last day of classes, Valera approached Jake with a small gift. It was a crystal from her home world, shaped like a teardrop and filled with swirling blue light. "This is a friendship stone," she explained. "On my world, we give them to people who have taught us something important." Jake took the crystal carefully. "What did I teach you?" Valera smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Jake had ever seen on her face. "You taught me that strength does not mean never getting hurt. It means getting hurt and continuing anyway. You taught me that fear can be overcome. You taught me that the universe is full of amazing beings who are far more remarkable than they appear." Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Thanks, Valera. That means a lot. Will you return to the academy next semester?" "Yeah, I think so. I like it here. The technology is amazing. The classes are interesting, and the people are pretty nice once you get to know them." Valera laughed, a sound like tiny bells ringing. "Even though we were all terrified of you at first?" "Especially because of that," Jake said with a grin. "It gives me something to work on. By the time I graduate, I want everyone here to see humans as friends, not scary death world monsters. I think you are already making progress on that goal." Jake looked down at the bandage on his arm, at the scar hidden beneath it. Such a small wound. Such a huge reaction from everyone around him. It was a reminder of how different humans were from the rest of the galaxy. but it was also a reminder of what they had in common. At the end of the day, everyone just wanted to survive, to learn, and to find their place in the universe. Humans did it their way. Other species did it their way. And maybe, if they worked together, they could all learn from each other. Jake tucked the friendship crystal into his pocket and headed toward the shuttle that would take him home for the break. He had a lot of stories to tell his family back on Earth. Somehow, he did not think they would be surprised that his biggest adventure at the Alien Academy involved nothing more than a cut and a bandage. After all, they were humans too. They understood.